welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 20, where we're talking about the seminal winemaking worker placement game, Viticulture. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes, but first we're going to go, like we always do, to the news. Our first bit of news this week is that Hero Realms from White Wizard Games, which is like the cousin to Star Realms that we just reviewed a couple of weeks ago, this has a new expansion on Kickstarter right now. The Lost Village campaign and the Journeys expansion are all sort of mashed together into one Kickstarter. This is actually really cool. They have a campaign expansion that came out last year, I believe, and that allows you to play through like a 15-chapter story for Hero Realms with branching paths and everything. This is a sequel or a continuation of that story. You just take those same base mechanics and just give it more variety of play, basically, from game to game.
Yeah, from what I've seen on it, it looks really, it looks cool just the way you can kind of combine things together and, I guess, make the deck you want.
Yeah, I think it looks fascinating. If you have Hero Realms and you like it, and you've already made it through all the content that's out there, then this looks like a great, easy way to expand your game. And the addition of the Journeys side of this campaign as well is really interesting because you can get new champions, new action cards, and a whole new kind of card called a quest card, which allows you to earn these really powerful new items that you can add to your deck and to the trade row called relics. So that's really interesting. If you're interested at all in Hero Realms, check that out. That's on Kickstarter right now. Our second bit of news is another Kickstarter expansion, and this is for Nemo's War from Victory Point Games. Are you familiar with Nemo's War at all?
No, I looked at some stuff on this, and I'm not familiar with it. I'll be honest, the theme doesn't really grab me, but
yeah, it didn't really grab me that much either, even though I was a big fan of the Jules Verne book as a kid.
Right.
I really like the idea of the game, though, because you play Captain Nemo and you have a different motivation for your quests underwater. And I guess that radically changes what the game looks like. I don't know. It just seems like a very interesting idea to me for a game. Something I want to try at some point. It's considered basically a solo classic, I think.
Right. Yeah, that's the impression I got. But yeah, I think for me, it was just, it didn't quite have the same luster. Maybe if it had a slightly different wrapper for me. But yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Still, the idea seems really cool, though.
Yeah, it does. And if you do like it, and a lot of people do, there are 2 new expansions on Kickstarter right now that I had no idea were coming out. This sort of snuck up on me a bit. This is the Bold and Caring expansion, which adds 2 new motives for Captain Nemo, which is, a big deal. And then the Dramatis Personae, I don't know how to pronounce that. That expansion adds 9 new adventure cards and 1 finale card. And the best part about this is that in a very crowded Kickstarter world right now, you can get these 2 expansions for $12 because they're basically just a few cards. So if you want an easy way to expand your game and just add more replayability, $12 will get you there. Check that out on Kickstarter. That is Nemo's War's 2 new expansions. And our final piece of news for this week is that Awaken Realms, which is the publishing house that brought us games like Nemesis is their new one, Lords of Hellas, The Edge, Dawnfall, all these big, very miniature heavy games. They have a new game coming out called Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. And I'll be honest, I'm not really that interested in many of their other games. They seem okay, but they seem much more focused on the miniatures than the gameplay, certainly the solo gameplay. But when I heard that this is like 7th Continent, but just turned up to 11, with a really dark Arthurian theme, I'm interested. I'm very interested in this.
Yeah, it looks cool. It's one of those things I would like to see more about or find out more.
If you are interested in learning more about this, Rolling Solo, which is a YouTube channel that does a really good job covering solo games, they are just starting, at the time of this recording, a preview of this game. So if you want to check out what the solo gameplay looks like specifically, go and check out their channel and get ready for the campaign, which starts on December 5th. That's Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. Okay, so that's all we've got for the news for this episode. So let's just get right into the review, which is for Viticulture. Viticulture is a game from designer Jamie Stegmaier and Alan Stone, and also Morten Monrad Peterson with the Automa Factory for the Automa variant in this game. And it comes to us from Stonemaier Games in 2013 originally. Plays 1 to 6 players and takes 45 to 90 minutes to play according to the box. In Viticulture, players are going to find themselves in the roles of people in rustic, pre-modern Tuscany who have inherited these meager vineyards, and they have a few plots of land, an old crush pad, a tiny cellar, and 3 workers. In the various seasons of a given year, you're going to be placing workers down to help you build up your vineyard and your cellar, to help you attract visitors, and then fill orders for wine, with the goal ultimately of running the most successful winery in Tuscany. This is a hugely popular game that basically launched this publisher, which is now one of the most beloved publishers in the entire industry. When I say this game is well loved, I mean this is number 18 in the strategy rankings on Board Game Geek, and it is the number 19 game, period, according to BGG users. So it's a very big deal, and we recognize that going into it, and we know that a lot of people play it solo anyway, but I still regularly see people asking about what the solo game is like for this, so we just thought now is a good time to dive right into that. So we'll start like we always do by talking about the components. And this is going to be a little bit trickier than our normal discussions on this topic because I own Viticulture Essential Edition, and I also own Tuscany, which is the big box expansion for Viticulture. Plus I bought the metal coins for this game, plus 2 small expansions that just add cards. So that's a lot, all thrown in one box. Carter got to encounter all of that at once.
Yes.
So we're just going to try to talk about the base game components first. The smaller board, the cards, the wooden bits, the glass beads. What did you think about all that?
I think it's a pretty nice package. It's nothing that's going to blow you away. The art, I would say, is mediocre, at least for me. I think the like UI design, I guess user interface. Do you call it user interface with board games? I don't know what you call it.
Maybe graphic design?
Graphic design. We can edit that out, right?
Yeah, certainly we can definitely edit that out. It
Right.
won't be in the episode.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So yeah, the graphic design on top of the art, I think is pretty good. The components are all, solid, but nothing mind-shattering blowing. I will say there is a simplicity to the little glass beads you use. Sure, they're satisfying to have something different, but the way they magnify on the little different grape spots and wine spots is just a nice touch.
Yeah, I agree. I like the glass beads, and there aren't that many games that use them, but they feel nice to use. They're pretty weighty, and when you're using them to track, the numbers of grapes in your crush pad or the number of wines in your cellar or whatever, it is really nice to have something that magnifies the numbers because those are pretty small on the board.
Right. And it also helps distinguish what number is over a little bit better because it is larger than the neighbors.
Yes, absolutely. I guess I would describe the components for this game as befitting the theme, I guess, because the artwork is this beautiful sort of painted style, and the whole thing just looks and feels very elegant to me. It's not a box full of miniatures or anything like that, but the wooden components for this game are simple, but they're beautiful and functional, and when you put it all out, it just looks like it goes with a theme about winemaking in Tuscany.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the base game alone has really nice, beautiful components, nice sturdy box that holds everything well. And we're just going to say here, I know there's some confusion over Viticulture versus the Viticulture Essential Edition. Don't worry about that so much because they don't make normal Viticulture anymore. So just get the Viticulture Essential Edition. It has the original game plus a couple of smaller expansions from what used to be the single big box expansion, Tuscany. Apparently Uwe Rosenberg helped pick out the most essential of those expansions to include here in the base game. So just go with the Essential Edition. It's a great way to get started. So good solid components in there. When you add the Tuscany expansion, which again now is only available as the Tuscany Essential Edition, you just get an entire separate board that you can play with, like a bigger, more involved board. And I did notice that the original board is kind of a matte finish, and the new board is like a glossy linen finished
Right.
board.
Yes, it is slightly different finish.
And I wouldn't say it's better or worse. It's just different for me. Both of them look really nice, though. One of the things I love about the graphic design for both the expansion and the base game is that everything just looks sort of organic, I guess. It's very clear where you're supposed to place workers. It's clear what you get from a given spot, but it's not clogged with, I don't know, extra. It just seems like there's very little done to set out those worker placement spots from the landscape, for instance. So it doesn't really distract from that for me.
Right, yeah. It just, like, the art of this landscape of all of these different, like, all the different buildings where you'll take these actions, the action spaces are just right next to those buildings, but it all looks like the board would look fine without the graphic design on top of it.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think all of it together looks beautiful. The expansion adds just more cards and a board, and honestly, it doesn't add that many more components. They're all the same quality as the base game. You're looking at mostly like wooden pawns and cylinders and little buildings, and it all looks just great to me. I especially love the little grape trellis one.
Yeah.
It has little tiny bunches of grapes hanging down from it. Yeah, very beautifully done. There are 2 smaller expansions for this game, which are just more cards. So the card quality in this game is good. Nothing to write home about, but it's fine. You also have the option to buy metal coins, and I believe these are the nicest metal coins in any game ever. I'm just throwing it out there.
They're pretty nice. Orleans has pretty nice metal coins. I think these are a little bit more sharp or crisp in their, I guess, cast.
Yeah, they're weighty, and I don't know. I love the metal coins from Raiders of the North Sea, too. It's a different kind of quality, I guess, but these are just my personal favorite. I think they look gorgeous. They're not necessary at all because the cardboard coins that come with the game, they look great. But if you enjoy the game, you can just punch it up a little bit by getting the metal ones for like $18 or something like that. So just know that that's out there, and those are really good quality. So the components as a whole, I would say, are really well done.
Yeah, I would say they're well done.
And I would say the same is true for the rules for me as well. The rules for this game can be kind of overwhelming if you're looking at the base game and Tuscany modules and everything all at once. But honestly, when you just read on their own the instructions for the base game and then each module, they seem to come in pretty bite-sized chunks for me, and the game is pretty basic in its rule set and does show you a layer of depth in play that maybe you aren't expecting based on the number of rules in the rule book. Does that seem fair to you?
Did you feel like the rules were just wasn't that many rules, and so it was easy to kind of get your head around it initially? Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, I suppose I mean that there aren't that many rules, and that it follows in a lot of the ways you would expect. It follows the major rules for worker placement games.
Right.
So if you've ever played another worker placement game, a lot of this is going to feel like familiar territory in a way that can be a little bit deceptive, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say, I mean, it still took me a little while to read through the rules because it's like even the just essentials base game has reasonably sized length rule manual. But what's nice is the quick reference sheet. If there's any question that came up while I was playing, I never had to pull out the main rule book. I could pretty much find the answer I wanted to on this, double-sided piece of paper.
Yeah, that's a good point. The reference sheets are excellent, and they're actually really good indications on the board itself that remind you, the order of a round and what a turn structure looks like and all that. I don't know. The graphic design on the board helps with that a little bit too.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I had no problem learning this game initially from the rule book. And so I don't know. It's a good rule set to me, well organized. And to me, that same sentiment can be applied to the play itself. A very well organized, solid play experience. This game comes out of the box feeling like a classic.
Yeah, I would say the game definitely feels polished in a lot of ways. There are things about it that I wish would maybe be a little different, but overall I would say it just has a lot of it feels very solid playing through it.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And if you've never played Viticulture before, the way we're going to talk about this is we're going to take a look at the base game structure and the core structure of Viticulture first, and we'll talk about that for a little bit, and then add in some of what the expansion adds so you can get a feel for how that rounds out the experience. The core experience of Viticulture is pretty simple, straightforward worker placement in a sense, but with just a twist. So you're going to be getting 3 workers at the beginning of the game, 2 normal workers, and a grande worker, which is just a bigger worker. I mean, visually, that's what it looks like. He's the big boy. So you're just going to be taking turns placing these workers down on the board and taking actions and just getting whatever resource or doing whatever thing that spot tells you to do, just like any other worker placement game. There are a couple of major twists on that formula, though, that make this special. The first is that you're going to be getting visitor cards when you play this game. So you're trying to build structures that help you to, make more and better wines. And the structures are basically gating mechanisms for making better wine.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there's a couple other structures that you can choose to do as just ways to get a couple of extra points to get some synergy between some of the actions, like getting a victory point every time you plant grapes in a field and things like that, or getting a victory point every time you give a tour.
Right. And building those feels very much like building a building in any other worker placement game, right? You just get some money from some other action, and then you take an action to build the thing. And that all feels pretty familiar. What happens when you get the visitor cards, though, is, you'll take an action to draw one, but these visitor cards, when you get the chance to play them, can give you some pretty powerful abilities. Sometimes just one-time abilities that give you a nice boost or that let you trade, points for a big influx of cash or something like that. And other times they are not quite in-game victory conditions, but ways that you can get a pretty solid chunk of points if you build your engine toward completing them later on.
Absolutely. Either completing them, or they might give you some bonus, but if you're not able to meet a certain condition by the end of the game, you actually get penalized in points.
And that feels really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the card play is so surprising. It adds that element of drama and tension that's not available just from playing a worker placement game by yourself. When you're playing a worker placement with other people, there's the tension of whether somebody's going to take that one spot that I really need. And worker spots in this game feel very tight.
Oh, yeah.
Like extremely, excruciatingly tight when you're playing multiplayer. When you're playing solo, you're going to be playing with an Automa deck, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But basically, that deck blocks different spaces on the board for you, and that can be drama-filled and frustrating as well. But it's not the same kind of drama as drawing a card. Like I've always enjoyed drawing event cards in games, even though they're just random.
Right.
I don't know, but it's just like extra fun for me.
Right. Especially when you have a sizable deck and all of the cards vary a whole lot in what they allow you to do and how powerful they are. And I would say most of these cards feel pretty powerful if you're able to meet the conditions, or if it just works out with kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, you can draw some that seem nice, but you're in no way built for them, and or they're just so situational that you don't feel like you're really going to pull them off this particular game. And there is that bit of disappointment when you use an action to draw a card and it's not something you could really use. But when you get something that you feel like, oh, okay, this gives me a little bit of direction, or man, I've already got this stuff here, I'm about to cash in on this big time. I don't know. Adding in card play with worker placement really works well for me here.
Yeah.
And so that's one aspect of this game that's a little bit different from others, but I think really works. Another is the timing mechanism. So you're going to be harvesting fields of grapes that you planted. And there's some math and planning involved in how you plant just the right grapes in your field so that you can get sort of the maximum yield every time you harvest. But once you get grapes, they go onto a crush pad at the bottom of your player board that's tracked by using one of those glass beads we were talking about earlier. And every turn, your grapes are going to age, basically making them better grapes than the ones you harvested. Or after you turn them into wine and your wine's in your cellar, your wine ages and becomes better as well. And as you draw wine order cards a little later in the game, you're trying to get a level 5 white wine and a level 3 red wine. There's this great timing aspect to the game where you're thinking, okay, if I wait until the next turn, all of my wines will be aged just the right amount, and then I can turn in this order card. And that will be the most efficient use of my wine. Because like getting a level 9 wine and spending it on a level 5 order feels atrocious.
Right. It feels like a waste. But yeah, if you're getting that timing right, and just how it can work out, well, if like, okay, well, I'll make wine this year, I won't do anything next year, and then the following year, then I'll meet this order because your wine has had, 2 years to age, and thus you hit those levels and you're able to focus on other things instead. So yeah, it has this nice timing effect, being really efficient. It just feels very good. Your actions kind of cascade into one another, and being able to optimize that, it feels really good.
It really does. And one of the things that I really love about this system is, like, yes, it feels bad when you are being inefficient with your wine and you're spending that high level wine on a lower level order. But when everything clicks into place and the plans that you set out, 3 turns ago come together at just the right time where you can fill like 2 orders that are decent size, it just has a way of making you feel like a genius in a way that only timing aspects of games really can.
Right. And I feel like for me, it wasn't even having to like look really far ahead. It was just as I was doing the things, I could kind of see a couple turns ahead. And it was just like, oh, if I do this, then this means this will happen. And then this will be at this spot at this time. And it'll all work out so beautifully. And it just feels good. It's like, yes, this is what's going to happen. And it's going to be great.
That first time that I played this game and I had that feeling, it reminded me of Tzolk'in a little bit, which is a top 5 game for me easily. I've always loved the timing aspect of that game, and you don't like this game really.
Yeah, no, Tzolk'in, it's not that I dislike it, it just breaks my mind.
Oh yeah, it definitely does for me too. This is like that, but pared way back in a way that's more comfortable to manage moment to moment, I think, and turn to turn.
Oh yeah.
But with a similar payoff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it just works really well and adds a whole nother element to what looks like on the surface a pretty basic worker placement game. And very quickly you realize, oh no, like this is thematically appropriate, except for aging grapes.
Right, you don't want to do that.
Yeah, don't age grapes. Ferment them and then let them age.
Right.
But apart from that, I just feel like it's thematically appropriate, and it adds a really rich sort of sub game to everything else that you're doing on the main board. That's really excellent. Another really cool twist on worker placement that is here, though, is the seasonal play. So by that, I mean, this sort of works out like you are planting grapes and trying to manage the calendar year time pretty well as you plan for your harvest and all that. And in the base game, in spring, you're going to be choosing your wake up order from a chart. And that just means, there's a chart on the board with the numbers 1 to 7, and you're going to be picking how early in the day you want to wake up and start working. Meaning, like, do you want to place workers before the other players in a multiplayer game? And the earlier that you pick on the wake up chart to get up, I mean, you have first pick of actions, which is a huge deal in this game. But the later you wake up, the more bonuses you'll get. So you can elect to go last and get a whole nother worker for the round, which is a huge bonus.
Oh, yeah.
So that system is not new to this game. I think it was in Fresco before this and a few other games. It's not original.
Right.
But it's still genius. And it's like such a small piece of this game that it doesn't feel like an intrusive mechanic to me. It just feels like something that, of course, you would have to manage how early your workers wake up to see if you get all your work done, I guess, that you want to do.
It's really well implemented in a way that is hard to imagine it without. It just fits perfectly in with everything else that's kind of at play in the game.
Exactly. And it's a great way to start the round. So that's what you do in spring. And then, so that's the spring season. It's a pretty small season, quote unquote, but it is important. The heart of the game, though, are the summer and winter seasons. And this is such a fascinating concept to me. The summer half of the board, which is the left half, has all of these actions for things that you would do to start planning for how you're going to make wine in summer. So you might be planting vines down in your field, and preparing the ground to start growing the grapes, and doing sort of that prep work, making changes to your cellar, building new structures, things like that. You do that stuff in the first half of the game. And the trick is you only have those 3 workers, and you can put all 3 of them in summer and do actions there. But when it comes time to do winter actions on the second half of the board, if you've used all your workers, you can't take any winter actions.
Right. Yeah. It's just really cool having two different placement phases and workers that you have to kind of divvy it up for that. And just where you want to try to focus on whatever year, or maybe you end up focusing on a different side just because all of those spaces are taken. And so you can't really do much there.
Oh, yeah. It seems simplistic, but if you're not planning ahead for basically your entire turn, you can really mess yourself over.
Oh, yeah.
You know, getting to winter and realizing, I didn't do this thing that I needed to do. Because when you're in winter, you can't place workers on the summer actions. That time's gone.
Right.
You know, that thematically is appropriate. And mechanically, it's just, it requires such good planning and a really good strategy. That is, of course, upset a little bit by the fact that you also have to deal with where other workers are going to be blocking you.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to plan for what might happen in terms of which spaces will be blocked is a great tension for me. It feels tense as you play.
Yeah, absolutely.
The final twist that I think is important to mention for this game is the grande worker. So he's not just a bigger worker. He is a worker that can be placed on a spot even if another worker is already there.
Including your own. Which is a incredibly important little caveat there. So that may not sound like a huge deal, maybe just like a nice little perk. But here's the thing. As you play this game and you're trying to manage the seasons, and you see somebody or the AI in the solo game take a spot that you feel like you need, like, say, harvesting your fields. You know, maybe you've got a few bottles of wine in your cellar, but you really wanted to keep that engine flowing but you really wanted to keep that engine running, and so you wanted to harvest this turn so you can set yourself up for more future wine orders, right? Well, the question becomes, do I go ahead and use my grande worker in this season to go ahead and harvest my field? Because I don't know what is going to happen, a couple seasons from now. What am I going to do when the fill order spot is taken? And how am I going to be able to get points for the wines that I've made? You're tempted always when a spot is taken to go ahead and place that worker down. But then there's a part of you that says, but hang on to it. They might take a more important spot later on that I need. Right. There's a natural push your luck flow to the game, which is just a really nice tension and makes you just pause and think, do I want to use my grande worker here or do I want to wait? Yes.
It's so good. I mean, it's amazing to me to think that when this game originally came out, it did not have the grande worker mechanic. I mean, that's mind-blowing to me. That's like the key element of what this game is in my mind. This and the seasons.
Yeah. It makes it better. And also, I can't imagine just having no way to take actions that were blocked.
Oh, I can't either. And not being able to double up on some actions, because being able to fill 2 wine orders in one turn can be crucial at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So it's a really fascinating series of twists that they put on this core bunch of worker placement mechanics here that really make this to feel like its own thing. On the surface, yes, it doesn't have like a board full of moving gears, right? And to me, that's the level of worker placement game that I was expecting when I first saw this sitting out. But there's much more going on here.
Oh, absolutely.
So all these twists come together in a really nice, surprising, satisfying kind of way. And so managing the cards, managing the seasons, all that works out great. Plus, it's a race game. So you are trying your hardest to get to 20 points if you're playing a solo game before the end of 7 years, which is 7 rounds in the game. And so you can't just take all your time building up your engine. You also just need to start cranking out points. And that's kind of nice too, because it keeps the game moving at a really good clip. I can play games of this now in like 45 minutes. Yours were a little longer.
Right, but I could easily see it getting to 45 minutes if I'd played as many times as you have.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And so, it moves along at a good clip. If adding a race element adds another layer of tension, or maybe just a different kind of tension that's present in other worker placement games, I would say.
You realize you're talking about race and tension.
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize I was talking about tension in race. Oh, well. Okay. There is sometimes tension that surrounds race, dear listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there's just a lot of good that comes together, lots of small pieces that really come together to feel like more than the sum of their parts to me. One more thing about the base game that I maybe didn't mention, you also get an asymmetrical start. So there's a little mini expansion that's included in the Essential Edition called the Mamas and the Papas, where you pick one mama and one papa at the beginning of the game that gives you sort of a starting structure or starting money or whatever. It's a very small thing, but it changes it up from game to game, and it feels really nice and fresh to me.
It's just a little different.
Yeah, and this version also includes the option to sell some of your fields where you could plant grapes to get you sort of an influx of cash at the beginning, which gives you some more freedom than some of the earlier versions did. Both of those things lend this game a sense of identity and freedom for you as the player. Now, that's the base game. One other thing we want to mention here is that when you buy the Essential Edition, you get the Automa variant in the box for the solo game. And the way this variant is going to work is very similar to some of the other Automa Factory games, including the Patchwork variant. It feels kind of similar to me to this one.
Yeah, I would say so.
In the sense that you have a deck of cards and you're just going to shuffle them up at the beginning of the game, and every season you're going to flip a card and place workers where it tells you to place workers for that season.
I would say it's even less upkeep than Patchwork.
You might be right. And it also includes on the cards worker placement spots for the bigger board for Tuscany, which is nice. So if you do want to get the expansion one day, everything you need is already on the card. Mm-hmm. I think that's great.
Oh, absolutely.
So you're just going to flip a card, and the Automa is going to place down some of its workers to block spots from you. It doesn't collect resources. It doesn't build buildings. All it does is put down its workers. And it puts its score marker at the win marker for the multiplayer game on the board, which is 20 points. And all you have to do is make it past the 20-point mark by the end of the 7th round, and you win. It's very simple, and that is its definite strength in my mind. It's just so easy to manage turn to turn that its turns just zip right by. It does give up some things in the process, though.
Oh, yeah.
So we played Anachrony and reviewed that several episodes back, and what that game managed to do with allowing you to see the options that the AI might have on its next turn, it really did a great job of emulating another opponent. This doesn't do that at all. It's just a random card flip.
It's just random spaces being occupied.
And that's not bad necessarily. It's just that you can't really plan in the same way you could in a multiplayer game. You know, tension is paramount in a worker placement game that you play with other people, because knowing that other people might want the same spot as you and trying to guess whether they will or not is a great feeling. When you remove that tension from a solo experience, you definitely lose something just by moving with a random card flip. So you just have to know that that's part of the experience.
Yeah, it's just essentially random. Sometimes it feels real bad, but it's, I don't know, it keeps the game moving along. It's not my favorite. I mean, it's one of those things that after playing Anachrony, all I can think of is how great that system is and just the board. And it's more management, definitely. But just, the sense it gives you of anticipation and kind of, it's a more meaningful way of kind of taking risk and pushing your luck with whether or not, the automated player is going to take certain actions or not.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it is quicker, and that is a strength that Anachrony doesn't really have. That's a good long game. And it does feel like an evolution on this formula, but you do give something up there as well. So, just sort of know going in that you're not really going to be able to plan so much for what the Automa is going to do, but easy upkeep, and the win condition is pretty boring. Just make it past that spot.
Yeah. And I would say just, unless you get bad luck, you're probably going to get to 20, I would think, every time. I mean, have you ever not made it to 20 just under basic conditions?
Yeah, I've not made it to 20 several times.
Okay, well...
But I'm not good at games.
That's not really true. There are some ways to modify the single player experience of giving you different goals that kind of like mutate some of the rules as far as how the Automa version works. Or not the Automa version, but just how actions work, that you take them, some different conditions, different starting conditions, things like that.
Yeah, and there are difficulty tiers too. So if you find that you're having a really easy time, you can bump it up a couple more steps in terms of difficulty, and you've got an extra challenge there, which is really nice, I think.
Yeah, it's difficulty, and they also have an aggressive version where the automa is scoring points, and it starts at -5, I think, in almost all of them. But anyway, it's scoring points every single turn, and if it ever gets ahead of you, it just automatically knocks you out and you lose. So there's kind of a race element. So it's pushing you to take actions faster, or maybe not just do engine building. Like, you have to get points at a steady clip.
Which in some ways feels more like the multiplayer game than the other version does.
Yeah.
Right, because you are trying to race down the track quicker than other people, and sometimes you're just shortcutting your engine a little bit.
Right. Because the game ends in multiplayer when you hit 20, not at the end of 7 years.
That's exactly right. So to me, it feels a little bit closer to that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that's good. Having those two options is great. Plus, there's a campaign in the book, which is nice, that sort of changes up some of your starting conditions for the game, but also one or two of them that changes up your end condition as well. Maybe one that changes it.
Right. Well, that was, I guess, mostly what I was referencing to, the campaign settings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think the Automa version overall is very well done. The randomness of the cards, though, is a bit of an issue for me. And, there are some variants on the, get to 20 points thing here in the rulebook, but the win conditions is definitely not the strength, I would say, of this game. That said, though, I do want to mention that there is a relatively new user-created solo-specific campaign available on Board Game Geek that I have not started playing through yet, but I have read through, and I think sounds really interesting, and it's gotten a lot of love from the solo community. So you want to check this out when you get a chance. This is from BGG user Steven St. John. He created a custom solo campaign. We'll provide a link to that in the show notes so that you can check it out for yourself. But it's a series of progressively more difficult challenges that are thematic and sort of chart a family's journey as they begin to build up this vineyard in Tuscany. And I don't know, it's a little different from what's in the rule book, because the rule book is sort of a series of challenges, but it's not really thematically tied to anything. I really like the idea of this user-created campaign, and when you consider this in addition to the campaign that's in the rulebook, that's a lot of content.
Yeah, there's a lot of content in that. And we haven't even talked about Tuscany yet, which even just adds even more content.
Yeah, actually, probably now's the time to talk about it. So if you buy the Tuscany Essential Edition expansion, what you're going to get in the box is, first of all, a new board.
And I mean, playing with that board or having it available, I can't imagine ever playing with the base games board.
I will say, I've heard lots of people say that. I have played with the base game board a couple of times when I didn't feel like relearning the rules for the extra pieces on the bigger board.
Sure.
And when I'm playing with brand new players.
Okay, yeah.
If they're not really gamer people, I think it's a little easier to swallow. But as far as a single player thing is concerned, you're just going to play with the new board.
Yeah.
This new board is so sweet because instead of placing down workers in 2 seasons, now you're placing them down in 4 separate worker placement phases, which doesn't really slow the game down, interestingly.
Right. It doesn't slow the game down hardly at all. It makes the wake up order and the bonuses that you get throughout the year, that changes, and it's a cool little change. It has a little small mini map of Tuscany and your influence on it and the bonuses you can get from that, like immediately, and like in-game victory points you can get if you have more influence in different areas. Just like a couple of nice little additions. Yeah,
they're not major changes except for the addition of those 2 seasons. That is crazy how much extra planning it gives you when you start trying to think through. I mean, you've got 3 workers at the beginning of the game. Which seasons are you not going to place any workers?
I mean, yeah, and also it really amps up the feel of the grande worker and whether or not you want to hold on to them. Because, I mean, 4 placement, or 4 different 4 different worker placement phases where you might really want to use the Grande worker in winter, but you were just assuming that you were going to get a spot in spring, and that is a long, long way to wait.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And once you've played it through one time, I think it's hard to go back. It's a wonderful addition. I think, in my opinion, the expansion is worth it for this board alone.
And that's about MSRP of $30.
Yeah, $30. So the base game has an MSRP of $60. This is $30. It's a great deal to me. I mean, when you look at just what's in the box in terms of components, it might not sound like that much, but in terms of what it adds for gameplay, it's wild to me.
Yeah. It has several different modules that you can choose to use or not. I mean, you would never use all of them together, or at least, I mean, that seems crazy. I'm sure there's people that do, though.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there are people who do, but those people are nuts. I would say the strength of this game is that it's brief and it moves pretty quickly. I play with 1 or 2 modules and just change it up from game to game, which keeps the game feeling very fresh.
Yes.
Because you can mix them and match them however you want to. It's outstanding. Also, the Automa scales with the number of expansions you add, which is great.
Yeah, I think it has a couple of exceptions in the rules of, well, this module doesn't quite work with it, or you can't use this. But I mean, it more or less works with most of the modules.
It does, and that's speaking about my Tuscany expansion specifically. If you get the Tuscany Essential Edition, which is I think the only version they're still making, correct, I believe all the modules in that are compatible with the solo mode, which is great. And the other 2 besides the main board that it adds are specialized workers. So like you could get a farmer specifically, or like a clergyman or something like that. I mean, like there are these just special workers that give you different powers for placing that particular worker in certain spots. It's really neat, very interesting little module. I've only played with that a couple of times, but not because I don't like it, but just because I don't always think to include it. It's still absolutely excellent. The other more interesting module to me, though, is the structures module, which allows you to basically build new worker placement spots for just you. So functional buildings that, instead of just serving as gateways for what kinds of wines you can make, actually give you new actions to take for yourself. That is very cool. I really like that a lot. And there was a little bit of that in the Viticulture main game with, like, if you built a yoke, I think it allowed you to take a special action on your player board. Mm-hmm. And it's nice not having to compete with other people for an action you want to take. That feels great to have your own private action, but it's much better in the structures thing.
Yeah.
So it's just an outstanding expansion. I can't recommend it enough. Honestly, with the base game alone, you already have, in my mind, a lot of replayability between the cards that come out from turn to turn, the mamas and papas, and that asymmetric start that you get there, and just how those things are going to shape how you approach the beginning of the game, which then, transforms your entire play experience. Card draws alone majorly shape how you're going to play for this game. When you add in Tuscany and you have the ability to swap out these modules, oh man, it just feels, it's outstanding. It's a great deal at $90 MSRP, I would say, over the long haul.
Yeah, there's just so much replayability. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's lots of modules. I mean, just switching it up, what you're going to kind of focus on, what kind of experience you want. And I mean, even if you were playing with the same modules most of the time, I would say there's still a lot of replayability even within that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if you do want more replayability, there is, of course, the user-created content that we were just talking about earlier. Plus, there are 2 small box expansions. One of them is the More Visitors expansion. That's More spelled M-O-O-R. This is a great little expansion because it just adds more visitor cards. And that's outstanding. Mm-hmm. I mean, who doesn't want just more cards to play around with? That's one of the most interesting parts of the entire game anyway. Then there is the Visit from the Rhine Valley expansion. This is great because it works as an alternate set of visitor cards. So you can either play with the base game and Tuscany cards plus more visitors, or you can play with this Visit from the Rhine Valley set, which has its own kind of flavor to it. That's outstanding to me. I mean, what a great idea to greatly increase the replayability of your game and keep the price point low. So all that together, we've talked so much about the play of it and the quality of the components and all of that. It's time now for us to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And we're going to be talking, I think, about the entire experience. That's Viticulture plus Tuscany. And I would say there is a lot to like in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty easy to pick up. It plays fast. It's easy to keep it going and not get bogged down. All the replayability. And I mean, I would say with the replayability, I don't love the Automa deck and how it works and that, I guess the mechanics surrounding playing solo, but just the amount of replayability and just the core gameplay is more than enough to make up for that in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. The Automa deck is good. It's not outstanding, but it is good. It provides a really solid basic core goal for your solo play. But what makes solo play fun is actually the core mechanics of the game, because all those stay intact from the multiplayer game to the solo experience. And for me, that's what makes this a rich and rewarding solo game. The fact that you can take this mishmash of mechanics in some ways that shouldn't work with area control, with the mini-map module that you've got in the Tuscany board, to trying to manage the different seasons of worker placement, to the Grande worker and the wake-up chart. It just feels, that plus the timing of the grapes, it feels like all those things together should be too much in one game and shouldn't really mesh together. But man, it does. And once you start playing a couple of rounds, it has a great sense of progression too. When you fill a couple of wine orders for the first time, has this great little mechanic where not only do you get points for filling the orders, but you get residual income. So every round you'll start with, 1 or 2 money, or you can get up to, I think, 5 money coming in every round. Wow. That's tremendous, because money is very tight. Very, very tight in this game.
And points, we should say. The score, what do you call it? Score counter? Score track? Score. The score track on this game caps at 40, just to give some context of every point matters. Yeah,
every point, you're definitely fighting for it. And because it's a timed experience too, and because points matter, it fills you with tension, I would say.
Yes.
I mean, there's so much tension and so many decisions and so many levers that you can pull for a game that is pretty simple. It looks simple. It's beautiful on your table. And it has this sort of elegant, highly polished feel that I just don't see in many games. Almost every game that we've tried for this show has a significant number of rough edges to it, and some of that is that solo rules aren't always very well worked out and they're sort of tacked on at the end. Other times it's just because, the publisher just hasn't taken care of every little thing that I would like them to. In this, it just feels like they must have play tested this a million times. And it's just, to me, it's a work of art in terms of how simple it is, but how much it gives you to play with. And a heck of a way to start an entire publishing company.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly. So the solo experience feels gratifying. There's a lot of replayability in this box. Keeps it feeling fresh from game to game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all those things come together to form a lot of good. As for things that are bad about the game, one of the things that I would put in this category is the randomness of the Automa deck. It's not really bad. It's just that sometimes it just feels arbitrary which spots are going to be taken from you. That doesn't always feel good to me.
Right.
Doesn't do a good job of replicating that multiplayer experience. So certainly not enough to turn me off to the game, but it's just a thing that I wish could be fixed here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one other thing, and this is really... The first time I played this game was probably 2015 or so. I can't exactly remember.
Yeah.
But playing it then versus playing it more now, one thing I've kind of realized about worker placement games that hasn't aged well for me is having to take actions to get more workers, and how huge of a disparity that can create between you and other players if you're doing multiplayer, but also just how it makes it feel almost mandatory in so many of these games because of how big of a difference. I mean, you start with 3, but you could have a potential of 6 workers. I mean, that's taking twice as many turns. That's like getting extra years worth of actions. And that, it just feels, it doesn't feel good. Whereas some like other games I've played since use different systems of, like with, what was it? Like with Feast for Odin, for instance, where you're just getting more workers every single turn that you can use. Or when we played Raiders of the North Sea, well, I had some problems with the pacing of that. Still, just it was I feel like a pretty good system as far as like how workers came and went, and you're upgrading them and whatnot. It wasn't that impetus to just, I have to take this action to get more workers, and just how necessary that feels.
Yeah, I totally agree. To me, that is a problem with older worker placement games that is on par with feeding your people.
Yeah.
It's just that it feels like a seasoned worker placement player knows how important getting extra actions is. It is the difference between winning and losing. And because you feel you have to go ahead and take that action, you're denying yourself the fun of building your engine in different ways. So what's great about A Feast for Odin, or even about games that just give you a fixed number of workers or one worker, you know, is that you don't have to worry about managing that piece of the game. You know, if it all comes to you at the same pace, that means nobody is just pulling out ahead in a way that means they can't be reached anymore in a multiplayer game. And it also means in a solo experience, I don't have what is basically a mandatory action, even though I'm told it's a choice. Right. I like the opportunity to just get workers at a steady pace, or to have the same number from the beginning of the game. And that way I can just build my engine in more interesting ways. So,
or just choose different strategies in general. Because, I mean, that's really what I feel like, to me, it comes down to is the strategy is always, having more actions is always the winning strategy.
Right. Which means then that your first couple of turns can feel the same every game, because you're always trying to do whatever you can to get the money it takes to hire a worker.
Right.
You know, and that doesn't feel great.
Right.
So, yeah, I agree. This would definitely go in the bad category for me. And it's not necessarily that it's a bad mechanic or that was always a bad mechanic. It's just that it hasn't aged very well. I mean, this is a game that's 5 years old, which, you know, in the board game hobby is basically ancient.
Right.
So since we have such an incredibly short attention span, but most of the game still feels incredibly fresh and innovative to me. It's just this one piece that kind of sticks out.
And I guess for me, that was more of just a reflection on, I guess, worker placement games in general, and not really specifically Viticulture.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For me, though, that's the only bad I can say about this game.
Yeah, there's no ugly for me.
No, absolutely not. This is an incredible package. It's a wonderful worker placement game, very solid, still feels innovative, still feels good, and when you finish with this 45-minute to an hour game, you realize just how much you've done to impact the game state at the end. Even though the flipping of the cards can feel arbitrary, if I lose, I feel like it's because I didn't plan properly, if that makes sense. So it's great. I really enjoy it a lot. And from my perspective, this is a game that gets the stamp of approval.
Yeah, it gets it for me also.
Yeah, that means for us, just for folks who aren't familiar, that this is a game that we recommend purchasing, picking up, even if you only ever play it solo. We really love this game. This is a game that's been in my collection now for, I guess, 4 years, and one that I still revisit regularly, even with new games coming in. This is a mainstay of my collection. I can't imagine it ever leaving, honestly. It just has the feeling, when you open the box, it feels like an enduring classic. And that's an accomplishment. So, highly recommended from us. This one gets the stamp of approval. And that's all we've got for this episode. If you haven't yet followed us on Facebook and would like to see more about what we're playing and what games we're getting in, follow us on there, and you can check out those pictures and communicate with us easily. You can also follow us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. We'll post all those pictures there as well. And if you have any questions or comments about the show, you can email us at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. And finally, if you haven't yet, please go onto iTunes and give us a rating or review. That makes it easier for other people to find the show. And it doesn't feel like a big deal on your end, but it does make a big difference for the show. So that's all we've got for this episode. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.